Good morning, everyone. It is December 30th, 2025. We're closing out the new year with stories that matter today here on the Ignition News. No fluff, no BS. We just need you to understand what's happening in the world, in the country right now. We have a lot of breaking news stories to talk about today. You know, one of the things and one of the reasons that we do the Ignition News is I think news is currently delivered to us in a way that is hijacking our amygdalas. You know, you scroll on Instagram or TikTok and it's breaking news, blah, blah, blah. And it kind of paralyzes us. So, our approach here at the Ignition News is to give you unfiltered, uncensored news that allows you to take in that information without all the panic, without all of the amygdala hijack. So you can go out and take that information and go make positive change in the world. But of course, you also have the billionaire capture of the American media system, which honestly, we're living through that right now. And then finally, you round that out with rampant censorship on the internet. We're trying to carve out a space of truth here on the Ignition News. So let's go ahead and do it. Let's get going with the news. The last thing I want to kind of highlight before we get into that, because a lot of the stories today are kind of all over the place. The thread that winds them together is as follows. If you're a millennial like me or a Gen Xer, you probably experienced a very different world of information. You experienced a world of information largely driven by the television and cable news. And then we got exposed to this thing called the internet for better and for worse. And the internet experience was much different than it is today. And one of the things that I think is really important for people to understand, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, Gen Beta, those new generations, they are consuming information in ways that are honestly harmful, not just because of what it does to your brain, but because it is so deeply censored, because it is so deeply filtered and so deeply restricted. We essentially get all of our information on the internet now from the same 5 places. And the information that we digest and get is basically what they have allowed us to digest and see. So, yeah, that's why we're doing the Ignition News. And I do want to, before I get into it, I want to let you know if you want to follow the Ignition, please find it on your favorite podcast platform. I was feeling really down yesterday because we've been doing this now for over a week and the traction's been kind of slow. But what I didn't realize was that Spotify does not update your follower counts in real time. So I woke up this morning to literally like quadruple the number of people following on Spotify. I felt really vindicated and validated by that. And the total downloads of the show now are catching up to our signature podcast. So the show's rocking and rolling. It's great to have you, everybody. And it's good to know that there's some people finding value. One of the things I want to make sure that you know is if there's a story in your local community that you want us to cover on the Ignition, let us know. But I'm blabbing. Let's get into the news. The first story today, China just took a massive step. We're kind of monitoring what's happening in the Taiwan Strait right now. And it is quite literally the largest show of force that we've seen in my recent memory. On December 29th and 30th, China launched military exercise dubbed Justice Mission 2025. And it was not just a drill. We're seeing 130 aircraft sorties, 14 naval ships, 8 Coast Guard vessels, and 27 rockets fired into the waters in and around Taiwan. This is a massive escalation in military presence in the region. The exercise covered 7 maritime zones, the largest area ever designated for Chinese drills around the island. And that include live fire exercises that lasted for 10 hours. Here's what makes this different than previous exercises, by the way. China explicitly stated these drills were designed to deter outside intervention. The Taiwan Affairs Office issued the warning. Any external forces that attempt to intervene in the Taiwan issue or interfere in China's internal affairs will surely smash their heads bloody against the iron walls of the Chinese People Liberation Army. So, just a minor update from China. That is literally just that is a direct threat to the United States and Japan is what that is. That is wild. And of course, the timing's really important here because the drills came 11 days after the US approved an $11.1 billion arms package to Taiwan. That is the largest arms package that we've ever entered into with the country. China responded by sanctioning 30 United States firms and individuals by launching these exercises. Taiwan's defense ministry tracked 90 Chinese aircraft into Taiwan's air defense identification zone in a single 24-hour period, the second largest incursion since 2022. More than 80 domestic flights were canceled. More than 300 international flights were effective. Chinese forces simulated blocking Taiwan's major ports. This is not a small show of force, ladies and gentlemen. This is a significant intervention at a time when America's leadership is literally crumbling on the world stage. And of course, Chinese military advancement is something we've talked about a lot. But to really point this out, they are absolutely utilizing the show of military force to demonstrate the rapid advances that they have made in, for example, humanoid robots, weaponized robotic dogs, and micro drones simulated attacking the island. This is, of course, both psychological warfare and an actual real demonstration of the increase of China's military dominance. China is sending a clear message that it considers Taiwan a red line, and it's preparing militarily and psychologically for the next steps. The problem is the United States is not in the situation or does not seem to have the sort of presence on the world stage to really do anything about that. Wild. So, as if 2026 was not getting any closer to us, now we just have to consider war with China. So, wild. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Ignition News. This is your December 30th update. Our next story is less of a current news story and more something I wanted to let you know about, which is private equity and veterinary care. Let's talk about what's happening when you take your dog or your cat or your pet or your parrot to the vet. The cost of doing that has become prohibitively expensive. And the share of Americans who are actually not taking their pets to the vet because of this has nearly quadrupled. It's staggering, actually. By 2021, corporate consolidation controlled nearly half of the veterinary care market, a quarter of general practices, and almost 75% of specialty and emergency care. Private equity firms have poured $51.6 billion into veterinary care, with another $9.3 billion just in the first months of 2024. This is obviously a huge problem. Why are they doing this? It's easy. It's a profitable and basically recession-resistant business. Pet ownership is increasing. People are spending money on their pets, even during during economic downturns. And, they're a member of your family. And so they know that it's sort of a captive audience. But here's what's happening to quality care and the cost of that care. Since 2014, prices for veterinary services have risen 60%, and now even routine visits cost over $300. Private equity has basically forced these clinics to have aggressive revenue targets, and over a third of their revenue comes from ancillary or add-on services. So you bring your pet in for a routine checkup, and they add on ancillary services like blood work, that kind of thing. Problem is, the cost of this is skyrocketing. And this is what private equity does all over the place. But veterinary care and private equity is its own special beast that we're really not talking about enough. That's why we have the Ignition News to shine a flashlight on everything that's happening in this country. Speaking of not knowing what's happening in this country, our next story on the Ignition News today. By the way, if you're new to the show, please consider following us on your favorite podcast platform. You can just search the Ignition News and you'll find it on Spotify, Apple, Substack, YouTube, anywhere where you listen to podcasts, you'll find it. It does help us to grow the show, to find news stories, and it helps, honestly, because putting the show together every day is expensive and timely. So please do follow the show. Our show is brought to you today by our signature podcast, Ignite, Fighting Fascism in the Age of Its Rise. If you're looking for a practical, tactical guide to fighting fascism in your local community, to being an effective community member, and to pushing back against the tide of white Christian nationalism in America, we have built a special guide for you called Ignite. With 12 episodes and 4 bonus episodes, it is a full blueprint, at least season 1, for you to go ahead and take that information and go make a difference in your community. We're really proud of it. And since we started this show, by the way, the downloads of Ignite have doubled. Big success. I love that. It's good for us. So please consider also listening to Ignite, Fighting Fascism in the Age of Its Rise. We're gearing up for season 2 right now. And yeah, it's really, really proud of that signature piece of work. Let's move on to our next story. Story number 3. Quick update on DOGE. Let's try to examine critically what happened with DOGE. If you don't know, if you were living under a rock, DOGE was established by an executive order on January 20th, with Elon Musk promising $2 trillion in savings annually. Of course, by the year end, that was revised down to $1 trillion, and then it was again revised down to $150 billion, then back up to $200 billion. And then DOGE officially disbanded in November 2025. Not many people are really talking about that. Obviously, Elon Musk left his role after a very public clash with the president, but now he seems to be buddy again. So while DOGE practically may not seem like much of a success, it did have a devastating impact on the government and the services you receive. So let's cover some of what DOGE was able to accomplish, if not directly by proxy. So the federal workforce is down 9%. From 3.015 million workers to 2.744 million in November. Government spending is actually up 6% from 7.135 trillion to 7.558 trillion. massive increase in federal spending. DOGE has had no noticeable effect on the trajectory of spending, but it did help engineer the largest peacetime workforce reduction on record. That is from the Cato Institute. Elon Musk himself admitted that in a recent interview. He called it somewhat successful, but he said he wouldn't do it again. He said his businesses suffered because of the work, including Tesla car burnings and protests. Most of the supposed savings from DOGE, by the way, were based on faulty math or just bad information in general. However, the disruption from DOGE's work was real. IRS offices are down to 1/3 of their staff compared to just 1 year ago. The Social Security Administration implemented a 3-day fraud check that delayed retirement claims, but also found almost no fraud. Aid programs have been gutted in the United States, with estimates that 163,500 additional children could die from hunger in Africa annually, every single year, because of what we did to foreign aid. The bottom line, of course, DOGE disrupted services. We laid off thousands of government workers, but we actually increased government spending. We gutted Social Security and Medicaid programs and debt interest payments. DOGE was just political theater, but now we're starting to see that we got the bad seats. We got the bad seats, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for following along. We're broadcasting live on TikTok. Big hello to the people on TikTok and to the smaller fam on Instagram. Thanks for following the show. It's not enough just to watch the show live. I do appreciate that you tune in, but we need you to go follow the show on one of your favorite podcast platforms. So please consider doing that. It is December 30th. Let's get on to our next story. Listen, one of the things that I want to make sure we're clear about here on the Ignition News, we recognize that one of the most present threats to the safety of everyone in this country is this country's relentless, unnecessary, cruel attacks on trans individuals. It is very clear to me, it is just very clear that this is an effort by the administration to take a very small group of people in this country and to utilize them to demonstrate, to build, and to showcase a form of cruelty, unnecessary suffering, and it's terrible. So one of the things we feature on the Ignition News is we talk about what's happening to trans individuals in this country because no one else seems to be willing to do that. So we see you. We see what this country is trying to do to you, and we will not be silent here on the Ignition News. Thank you for that, by the way. I appreciate that. Let's talk about story number 4. On December 24th, a coalition of 19 states and the District of Columbia filed a lawsuit against the Department of Health and Human Services, challenging a declaration that could cut off access to gender-affirming care for transgender youth across the country. On December 18th, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. issued a declaration claiming that gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and surgeries, is neither safe nor effective for minors. The declaration threatens to exclude any healthcare provider or institution offering such care from Medicare or Medicaid. It is quite literally threatening health practices with losing that funding. HHS also announced 2 proposed rules. One would prohibit federal reimbursements for gender-affirming care through Medicaid and CHIP, and another would ban providers who offer this care from participating in Medicare and Medicaid entirely, even if they provide the care in a private, non-federally funded setting. We really have to pause on that because we have to emphasize that your government is using the full force of the United States government to punish clinics willing to provide this care without federal funding in private practice. If they do that, they will strip them of all federal funding through Medicare and Medicaid. This could devastate healthcare in America, but what it certainly will do is it will dramatically decrease, if not eliminate, available healthcare for trans individuals in the United States of America. First of all, Robert Kennedy Jr., he does not have the authority to unilaterally define nationwide standards of healthcare. Second, this violates states' authority to regulate their own medicine and run their own Medicaid programs. And third, of course, the declaration contradicts overwhelming medical evidence. Major medical organizations, the AMA, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Children's Hospital Association, and Physicians for Reproductive Health all oppose these restrictions, saying quite clearly, gender-affirming care is evidence-based and in many cases, life-saving. So, again, we talk about this on the Ignition News because honestly, I haven't seen a story about any of the assaults on the trans community really in any major national news outlet. It's important that we talk about it. It's important that you're educated on this so you can go to your community, provide that truth, and fight for those people being affected by the government. Listen, I'm just going to be very blunt with you. They're doing this because it's an easy, soft target. If they can go after trans individuals, they can demonstrate the force of the United States government, and then they can go for the next target. So if you don't stand for one group in this country, guess what? This country is eventually coming for you. This is the Ignition News, everyone. I do want to talk about kind of an interesting story. Our next story is about Marjorie Taylor Greene. You say, why do you talk about MTG so much on the show? I want to be very clear with you. The reason I talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene on the show is that whether it's Tucker Carlson or Marjorie Taylor Greene, they have identified a world post Donald Trump. And what they're doing right now is they are on a massive land grab for the American electorate, for populism in the United States of America. And we are so blinded into thinking that this is a team sport, by the way, that we say, oh, she's a Republican or was a Republican, so I don't have to worry about that. Friends, what's happening right now is a dramatic shift in populism in the United States of America, and they're making a land grab for people who don't identify with any political party, which happens to be the vast majority of the American electorate. More Americans are willing to either switch or change their political views and are not as tied down to their individual political party as you might imagine. And in fact, either political party has any support above 33%. Both political parties are heavily disfavored in the United States of America. So people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or people like Tucker Carlson or even people like Nick Fuentes are actively on the hunt to try to expand their version of populism. That's why we talk about this on the Ignition News. First of all, because we see a different and better path to an America First agenda, just to be very candid with you. But second, we're not just going to look the other way when this happens. So let's get on to story number 5. It's an interesting story, a little bit lighter hearted, but still. Marjorie Taylor Greene gave a revealing interview to the New York Times recently that's worth examining. And it's not because we should be celebrating what she's doing. It's because it exposes something about the culture of MAGA. Marjorie Taylor Greene is obviously leaving Congress on January 6th, and her dramatic sort of falling out with the president has been very public, very public. Couple things that she said recently, but she's talking about another thing that I think, when you consider it in the larger picture of the Epstein files, is something worth examining. Here's what she said. The MAGA Mar-a-Lago sexualization, or the emphasis of hyper-feminine appearance among conservative women, is something that she's talking about. She said, I never liked the MAGA Mar-a-Lago sexualization. I believe how women in leadership present themselves sends a message to younger women. This is exactly why I'm talking about this. She's out on the front talking about cultural issues, while Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are sending $8.6 billion in F-15s to Israel. She said, I have 2 daughters, and I've always been uncomfortable with how these women puff up their lips. I can't say that part on TikTok, so you'll have to catch the rest of that quote. I've never spoken about it publicly, but I've been planning to. She talked about this thing called MAGA beauty, or the Mar-a-Lago face. We all know what she's talking about, right? The Mar-a-Lago face, right? What is that? She says it's this: conservative girl makeup, sky-high stilettos, tight skirts, bouncy hair, full coverage makeup, and conspicuous plastic surgery. She's arguing this sends the wrong message to women. She also said Trump has a woman problem, noting the way that he treats women reporters, calling one piggy, making comments about their appearances, and his history of sexist remarks, including Access Hollywood tape. Well, we all know what he said on that tape. Unfortunately, because of TikTok, I can't say that out here. But she pointed out this following: there's a significant reason why women overwhelmingly don't vote Republican. I think it's a very big message here. And by the way, folks, the message backs her up. 53% of women voted for Kamala Harris versus 45% for Trump. What are these other 45% doing? Anyways, men voted for President Trump by 55%. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene is not some sort of sudden feminist hero. This is someone who promoted hateful conspiracy theories. Remember, she talked about Jewish space lasers. But the fact that the media is now praising her for this kind of commentary highlights exactly why we are doing the Ignition News. In a desert, she recognizes that she can be a fountain of I don't want to say truth, but a fountain of commentary. And there is a lot of appetite for that commentary. Marjorie Taylor Greene is actively working to sort of rehabilitate her image on the American stage. And because there's no functional opposition from the Democratic Party, let alone messaging from the Democratic Party, she is being successful in her attempt to rehabilitate her image on the national stage, as is Tucker Carlson, as is many other people. And if we're not paying attention to this, if we're not paying attention to what's happening, we're going to allow that rehabilitation to happen. Marjorie Taylor Greene's broader break with Trump came, of course, with her advocacy to release the Epstein files. So that's why I say, when you look at this at a total perspective, and then you combine it with something that someone else mentioned here, she also pushed Trump to invite Epstein victims to the Oval Office, and the president said that they didn't deserve that honor. What a disgusting thing for the president to say. The takeaway here is obviously that we shouldn't trust that Marjorie Taylor Greene is acting in any other way than to rehabilitate her image, right? But it should be a bright red warning flag to you that there is no opposition messaging coming from the Democratic Party. It should be a big, huge red flag. Why are prominent leaders, and that's not to say there's no one talking about this, but why are the prominent leaders of the Democratic Party not having these populist conversations? Why are they not talking about the massive foreign aid we're sending to Israel while Americans suffer? Why are we not talking about the hypersexualization of these women? She's making a point, and the point is valid. Why is no one in the Democratic Party discussing this? We're ceding all of this ground of populism to basically the MAGA washouts. And if we're not careful, they're going to be successful. Let me tell you exactly why that is. By the way, everyone, thank you for following us here on the Ignition News. If you're just joining us here on the live stream on TikTok, I want to let you know that we do a daily news show. We do a daily news show called The Ignition. We're now moving on to story number 6. I just talked about sort of the gap, or the vulnerability gap in the Republican Party and the lack of response from the Democrats. But let's talk about what's actually happening to the Republicans. This is kind of interesting. Trump's Never Surrender PAC sent an email out on Monday. And it basically is not, those Nigerian scam emails that you used to get all the time before your spam blockers blocked them out? I don't think it's functionally any different than these scam emails we used to get to our Yahoo email address asking us to wire money to a Nigerian prince. The email had an image of Trump over a stove with a pot of boiling water. It said the following: "Troubles are boiling over. 3 reasons I need you to stop the boil now before an end of the year fundraising deadline." And his email warned that rebate checks are on the line. He claimed Dems want to send your checks to illegals if you don't respond in the next hour. Yes, that is what the email actually said. His fundraising team used a 1-hour deadline to pressure his supporters into donating by claiming Democrats would be stealing their future tariff rebate checks and give them to undocumented immigrants. First of all, the rebate checks he's talking about do not exist. They're just floating this idea of tariff rebate checks. The Better Bureau, by the way, flagged this as an active scam. His own fundraising email uses the exact same language as scammers do, creating an artificial deadline, right? Respond within the next hour, and threatening someone will steal something from you and demanding immediate action. So they're either engaged in a deliberate scam, literally mimicking internet scammers, or they don't care and it's indistinguishable from fraud. The problem with this, aside from the fact that it doesn't even make sense, the fact that tariffs are taxes collected at the border, who's going to prosecute this fraud? Who are we supposed to report this to? Kash Patel? Pam Bondi? Dan Bongino? Who's going to investigate the president of the United States email team, their campaign team, for actively committing fraud in the United States of America? The email also warned that control of the House and the Senate were on the line and that supporters' money was going to be needed for stopping communism. I feel so seen right now. Used images of AOC and Zohran Mamdani as examples of this. And it says, "We're walking on razor thin ice," and that they had a fundraising goal of midnight by tomorrow, or that everything they've worked so hard is going to go bye-bye. This is grifting, by the way. I also saw something on a different outlet where, depending on how that email was set up, that some people were signed up for automatically contributing a recurring $2,500 payment if they didn't uncheck a box. But let's be honest, the grip this man has over his supporters is strong, and I'm sure a lot of people saw that email and a lot of people went ahead and they donated anyways. It's really disgusting when you think about it. Everyone, it's been a good morning. I do want to close out with one last news story. Thank you for following along on the Ignition News. I do need you to go find the show. You can click the link in the bio if you're streaming live on TikTok right now. And if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Substack, or any other podcasting platform, please do click that follow button. Follow the show so that it knows to send it to you. It does help a lot. If you think the show's dumb and you don't like it, put a comment anyway, because that helps me just as much. So go for it. Let's close out the Ignition News with probably, one of the most important stories of the day. With all the chaos happening, the conversation around what's going on in Gaza is muted out by just everything that's happening in the world right now. We do have a quick update to close it out. Thanks for following along. let's get an update around Gaza. So we obviously know that the quote unquote ceasefire began on October 10th, 2025, after the president brokered a deal between Israel and Hamas. It was supposed to happen in 3 phases. Phase 1 involved releasing hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners and Israeli forces pulling back into designated lines. Phase 2 would involve complete withdrawal from Gaza, disarmament of Hamas, and the establishment of a Palestinian technocratic government. Phase 3 would involve reconstruction. We are still in phase 1. Allegedly. But more than 400 Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire took effect. So there's a ceasefire, but 400 Palestinians have been killed since that ceasefire took effect. That includes children, a 10-year-old who was shot in the head by Israeli forces while in a displaced persons camp. This happened just last week. Israel has accused Hamas of ceasefire violations, including the delayed return of hostage remain. One deceased hostage is still being held that we know about. Yeah, it's kind of hard to talk about this stuff. Trump met with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu at Mar-a-Lago. He said Hamas has a very short period of time to disarm, and if they don't, the consequences would be horrible. And then he suggested that other countries would get involved and, quote, wipe them out. Phase 2 of the ceasefire is still stalled over 2 critical issues. Number 1, Hamas disarmament, and number 2, the deployment of an international stabilization force to Gaza. Hamas says it is willing to discuss disarmament as part of a broader political process, but only if Israeli forces withdraw and the Rafah border crossing opens. Disarmament or decommissioning of weapons have to be connected to a serious political track, which has to end with the Palestinian state. That is according to a representative. Israel, on the other hand, wants Hamas to disarm first. The proposed ISF, or International Stabilization Force, is supposed to help demilitarize Gaza, but which countries are going to submit and have troops participate in that? That's kind of out in the open. Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S. met in Miami on December 20th to discuss phase 2. Turkey's foreign minister said he expects the second phase to begin in early 2026. Israel controls half of Gaza through the Yellow Line, a demarcation between IDF-controlled territory and areas still under Hamas control. Israeli forces have been rotating units in and out, which suggests they are still preparing for a long-term presence regardless of the ceasefire. The Trump administration is pushing for international forces to take over here, but the reality is the killing has not stopped in Gaza. The humanitarian crisis continues right now. It is an active crisis, and unless there's real diplomatic pressure applied to all parties, including and especially Israel, and including and especially the United States of America, the people of Gaza are still living under devastation every single day. And without addressing the root cause, occupation, the lack of Palestinian sovereignty, the blockade, any ceasefire is just a countdown to the next issue, okay? The root issue is occupation. Anyways, most of your national news stories aren't even covering that on a fleeting brush of news, but it's important that we continue to talk about that. So what ties all this together? Obviously, you have China conducting military drills. You have private equity buying up veterinary clinics. You have DOGE disrupting government services. You have 19 states fighting back. And then you have Marjorie Taylor Greene calling out MAGA's treatment of women. You have the president of the United States using Nigerian scam emails to trick people out of money. And of course, the Gaza ceasefire is fragile, if real at all, while hundreds of people are still being killed for no reason. None of this is inevitable, everyone. Truth and information are essential to fighting back, whether that's consolidation at the vet or whether it's your government services getting gutted, whether that's healthcare that should be left to doctors and family, whether that's women that, we should be having conversations about women being treated equal, not about the MAGA look. And of course, peace in the Middle East. None of this is inevitable. Truth still matters, and it requires us to pay attention. So thank you for listening to this edition of the Ignition News. I want to thank everybody who has followed the show, everyone who has submitted feedback. A quick reminder that if there's an important story that you want us to cover on the Ignition, you can go ahead and reach out to us at our website at theignition.news. Send us a message. Let us know what you want to cover. But most importantly, thanks. I hope you have an amazing day. Listen, we have today and then tomorrow. There are just 2 days left in 2025. And something we talked about last night on our show, Rebel Radio, was we talked about the hazards and the great sort of discomfort of the year 2025. And I would say arguably most people had a pretty rough 2025. But in that, our community found glimmers of hope, sort of glitter, if you will, glitter in the shit. We did. We found glimmers of hope, connection, community, and some version of prosperity. And the fact that we're still here today, the fact that we have survived this tyranny and that we live another day is a massive victory. The fact that we build our community, provide sources of information, and provide that community is a real victory. So let us exit the last 2 days of this year, 2025, and let us make the most of it. Have a great day, everybody.